Alright then guys, so I finally managed to get out of this freaking traffic that was going on back here, and it looks like in the process I've managed to lose my front camera, I think, because I don't see it recording anymore. But I'm just going to continue going on about the Yamaha R1 versus the BMW. So there are a couple of things that might be concerning to you guys in regards to electronics. So the BMW has Bosch traction control, which you can read about yourself. There's a couple of articles and even a couple of videos of how it works. It is actually the same system that is being used in, I believe, the 1299 Panigale now. Now, the Yamaha R1 counters that with their variable Yamaha traction control, which does the same thing. It's also lean angle sensitive, just like in the BMW, and they have multiple gyroscopes and an accelerometer basically measuring it. Actually, I believe it's just one gyroscope and accelerometer, but they do it in real time, just like the BMW. Now, the BMW also has Bosch stability control, and that one works basically by preventing slide. You can once again read about that yourself. Yamaha counters that one with their slide control, which does very similar in terms of its performance. You can also see the videos on that one online, but it's mostly been tested by reviewers, by different magazines, so there isn't necessarily an article written about it to my best understanding as far as I can tell. Now, BMW has what they call anti-wheelie control, which basically prevents the front wheel from lifting up. Should be fairly self-explanatory. And Yamaha counters that with having their own lift control. And looks like we're going to be slowing down here again. People just driving really, really slow. Now, both bikes have launch control, which is pretty great if you're into setting up some pretty serious, lap times for yourself, or if you're just doing drag racing. It's going to be quite useful here. Both of them have ABS, and the ABS is lean angle sensitive, and it's unified braking, which means when you apply the front brake on either machine, it's also applying the rear brake as well. In each case, the engine is also a stressed member, so it acts as a plenum, I believe is the right term, and as a result, the frames are extremely light, and the bikes are quite light themselves. Now, the Yamaha does have a bit of an advantage in that it's got a pretty much full titanium exhaust. There are a couple of pieces in there, like I think the muffler is not full titanium, and it's also using magnesium wheels as well. But where Yamaha loses out to the BMW is that the bike does not have an auto blipper downshifting function, which the BMW does have and makes downshift significantly easier for you. Now, there is kind of also a downside to the R1 if you're using it on the street, which is that the passenger seat is basically non-existent. Not quite the case in the BMW, but what that means for those of you who are Yamaha riders is that you won't necessarily need to go ahead and get yourself a seat cowl. If you're going out onto the track, you can pretty much just keep it stock. There's not a whole lot that you can do there. Now, to kind of move on here and take a look at some of the things that can make you lose weight on the bike. I've been recently kind of obsessed about that kind of stuff, and so as a result, I've been trying to get as many mods that would help me lose the weight, so I'm thinking of getting an exhaust next. So I've been looking at potentially getting things like lighter rims, so I've talked about that earlier, but now I want to bring it up again because the BMW does not come with any magnesium rims. So that's kind of a downside. Of course, you can get forged aluminum, but it's not quite as good. Now, the next thing that you can do to potentially still keep the bike street legal is you can get yourself a fairly light front fairing stay, but you're most likely going to lose the mirrors. So that's a pretty big one right there. You could also cut down your wiring harness. Now, this kind of depends on the bike that you have. Some of the modern bikes are pretty light, but some of the older ones you can save quite a bit of weight. Now, a big one that potentially is also a really good one to save some money as well is getting a different battery. Like a lithium-ion battery, for example, I believe is one of the newer ones. It's like LiFePO or something like that, PO4. And sure, I make some pretty good batteries, as does Ballistic, and you can seriously lose some pounds on the bike that way. And of course, you do have to be mindful that the battery is able to supply enough juice for all the electronics you're running on the bike, and that's something you may have to consult your manual about and also see if it compares to the battery pretty well. Also, you could of course get yourself a passenger seat cowl, which replaces the passenger seat with some lighter plastic. Rear sets is a very popular one. A lot of people go for those. Now, one that you can't necessarily do Actually, a couple that you can't really do on the street is getting yourself a lighter rear subframe. Now, in the case of the BMW, it's already made out of aluminum, so it's fairly light, but you can go lighter still. However, there are some issues in terms of housing the onboard electronics when you go that route. I believe there's a couple. There's Motovlog and Yoyodyne are the ones that do subframes for this bike, to my research so far. And you can kind of take a look at those yourself, but I believe that you would have to get rid of the passenger foot pegs, and you'd have to move the battery around quite a bit. So that's not necessarily an option for everyone in the street. It certainly isn't for me, because I like to ride with a passenger. But that's just kind of how it is. And, you know, if you want to lose a couple pounds here and there, that's a great way to do it as well, while also being fairly cost effective. So, as far as some other pieces here, I believe the next one is also a race alternator, and I'll talk about that after I'll get through this here turn. This one's getting kind of gnarly here. I've been trying to wave at some bikers as they pass by as well, so you might see me doing that from time to time. Hey guys, so finally getting out of this turn here. So the race alternator is a great way to save some weight on your bike, and it's also a pretty huge performance booster as well. And the reason being that when you reduce the weight of when you reduce the weight of the alternator, you're actually able to have a lighter crank because it's not having to spin more mass. You're also therefore increasing your acceleration, and there are serious horsepower gains to be had. Of course, it depends on the bike as well, but usually it's a really, really good way to go to shave down some weight on your machine. So I'd highly recommend going that route, especially if you're a racer. I believe on the BMW there's just a bit too many electronics to go that way on the street, and so I would not recommend it unless you know the exact kind of current that your bike is pulling, and also what kind of voltage your electronics are going to need as well. But that's one to consider as well. Now, there's a couple of other things that you can do here. Obviously, a lighter chain is the way to go. A lot of people do the 520 conversion. To go with the chain, you might as well just get some lighter sprockets. That will help reduce your rotating mass, which is going to have a quite significant impact on your bike's performance. Now, in addition to that, of course, if you're going to go and replace the sprockets, the rotors are going to be quite helpful. So get those. That will help reduce rotating mass as well. But you want to be beware of the traction control reader in the BMW. So I'm not sure if all brake manufacturers are 100% aware of this for the 2015 model, but you want to be pretty certain that it's going to work with the traction control system if you want to keep that one intact. Because I recall somebody saying that potentially you could have issues if you replace the brake rotors, specifically in the front brake, and the traction control system starts to malfunction. There's a couple of other things as well. You can also get yourself either a carbon Kevlar or a lighter aluminum fuel tank, which potentially both have more capacity. So on the street, it's pretty great having more capacity. But with the carbon tanks, you risk, if you go down, to have a pretty serious spill. And, having basically spent like $3 grand, you could just waste it all in a matter of minutes, essentially. Now, the lighter aluminum fuel tanks, they're basically just professionally welded, and they have thinner walled aluminum. Still safer than carbon. They typically tend to have more space for your gas, but you do have to be kind of aware of the fact that going that route, because you're going to have so much weight on top of your bike, it's going to add extra weight. And even though you've saved some by going to the larger fuel tank, you're most likely going to gain it back by putting in more gas into the bike. And you might also want to be careful because it could change the handling dynamics of your machine as well. Now, I've heard that you could potentially go with certain foams that go into your fuel tank to prevent the gas from splashing around too much, but at that point you would also be reducing the amount of fuel that you would be effectively able to put into your machine. So that's something to keep in mind right there, but it could potentially help you. And those of you guys who are racers, it's probably worthwhile to consider not having some fuel sloshing around on you all the time whenever you're riding. So now to go away from the weight saving mods here, there's actually another item that I recently came across for the BMW specifically, which seems to be pretty useful for me personally because I hate being in traffic, and that is a special clutch mod that actually makes the pull significantly lighter. And if you're a street commuter like myself primarily, and you tend to, be holding the clutch in quite a bit, this is huge. And I'll actually drop a link to that in the description here. I'm trying to save up some money so I can pick that part up as soon as possible, but we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it doesn't make the clutch flop around too much or anything like that. And the next thing to go along with that clutch is I was hoping to actually get some levers for the bike as well. Hopefully folding levers and maybe shorties as well. Since I have kind of small hands, it's significantly easier for me if I just go ahead and have smaller levers to pull. So that's going to be a big one for me, and I'll hopefully find a decent manufacturer out there that can get me those parts soon, and hopefully not at an expensive price as well. But to shift away from, just the electronics and the mods and stuff like that, there's a typical question that comes up, which is, I believe, do bikes get you the girl? And this is kind of a tough one to answer because from my personal experience, the answer is kind of both yes and no. I have seen during my high school days, for example, that a lot of the guys that would ride the cruisers would tend to have the girls just, pile onto their bikes essentially, and they just take off. So there's potential there for cruiser riders especially, but it's definitely still not one of those things that you should use to kind of bank on. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you've got no personality, then the bike's not really going to take you all the way either. But as far as sport bikes, I haven't personally had that kind of luck as those guys remember from high school. I've had a Ninja 250 and then an R1 and now this BMW. And what I do have to say is that generally speaking, you can get girls taking a look at you, and they'll probably come by and talk to you, and it's a pretty decent icebreaker. So I can definitely say that I've met new friends and I've made contacts with girls just because I had the bike, but it didn't necessarily directly lead to me getting laid, for example. So don't don't just expect that, oh well, once I get the bike, I'm just gonna be getting laid left and right. It doesn't quite work that way. But what it does work for is definitely getting you out there and getting you to meet some new people, because you for sure will take off somewhere, and then all of a sudden you'll just join a group of other riders, or they'll join you, and you stop somewhere and you pull over at a gas station and you start talking, and you basically just become friends for sometimes life at that point. You meet some really great people that have awesome stories to tell you, and they'll probably open your horizons up on what kind of bikes they ride and where they've been so far. And certainly, there's a lot of places that when you get a motorcycle, you can actually go and discover. Because unlike the car, it's not one of those machines where you just get from point A to point B for the sake of going from point A to point B. It's because you actually enjoy the ride. And so for me, personally, it's a great getaway because I'm able to just focus my mind on basically just flying, because you really do feel kind of like Superman when you're on these machines. You're really close to the ground, you're really far forward, there's not a whole lot going on in front of you except for the open road, and so you can just enjoy the adventure basically, and that's pretty much what it's all about. Especially for us motovloggers, it's all about going out and finding new adventures to have throughout the day, and also meeting you guys in the community, and also kind of helping the community out and helping them along. And for me, especially when I rode this bike, like in my first day, essentially, I pulled a really noob mistake by I was going in fourth gear, and then all of a sudden the whole highway just stopped, and I left my bike in fourth gear without downshifting. And of course, then I couldn't figure out why the heck my bike wasn't taking off, and I kept stalling it. Pretty much for like a good 2 minutes before another rider pulled up and said, "Hey, dude, you're in fourth gear. You're not going to take off unless you rev the bike or shift down into first." And so, the guy helped me out, and he got me along because I was getting pretty nervous. I'm on a brand new machine. I just totally pulled a completely newbie mistake there by basically just stalling my bike like 5 or 6 times over. But that's why the community is there, and so you'll meet people pretty much right off the bat as soon as you get your bike. It's definitely an experience worth having, and for sure it is one that you can't get when you have a car, even with all the clubs and the different motorsport associations that are out there, because with this you pretty much just kind of get thrown into it. So, and like a lot of motovloggers will say, whether you like it or not, it's just you become a part of a brotherhood essentially, and all the other riders, typically if they're nice, they'll wave to you and you can wave back, and it's just one of those kind of experiences that you need to really see for yourself. It's very hard to describe, but once you're there, you're absolutely gonna love it. And especially if you're a sport bike rider, you know, even though we kind of tend to keep to ourselves, it's something that you're gonna have to really appreciate, and you will appreciate it once you start riding some more. So this is going to conclude my second vlog, guys. I'll see you in my next video, and hopefully you enjoyed it. So go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you very soon.